Yo, we are here live with Brook and Amos Joseph on the Shitlord Preachers stream.
You better explain that for these people, man. You know where that
so,
comes from.
so first off, I'm going to introduce. Let's see here. I had the stream going on in the background. Okay, so I am Amos Joseph. This is Brook Potter here. I have named us the Shitlord Preachers. Anyways, so Brook and I have a bit of a background. We've both worked together in actually ministry, and we were both preachers. And now we kind of felt, I felt that this name was fitting since we're kind of doing this live stream and it needs a name, and we were both preachers, and we subscribe to shitlords and whatnot, and we're kind of becoming them ourselves. Just contributing to the shit posting, but more importantly, contributing to the social commentary. We're not going to go and say we're part of the skeptic community, but we try to have fun while also talking about some very serious and important issues that are going on today. So today we're actually going to be spending most of the stream talking a lot about Donald Trump and his move to ban transgenders from serving in the U.S. Armed Forces. I am at this time trying not to take any sides on the issue. I know a lot of people are either condemning or praising him for it in the most extreme ways and probably calling him every name in the book. Brook and I have kind of looked into it. I've looked into it a lot. Brook being not here in the States, it doesn't really affect him, but it's definitely an interesting thing to look into.
Absolutely, man.
So yeah, we're going to be kind of breaking it down. I got a few articles pulled up that we're going to go over, and Brook's got some examples that we're going to talk about just to kind of compare and see, is this kind of just look at it. I mean, I don't think we're really going to take any real hard. I'm not taking any hard stance one way or another, whether it's a good or a bad thing. I see good and bad from both sides, and I think that's something that's really important. A lot of people should be looking into before just jumping on with feelings. So
sure.
We've got some articles that we kind of saved from last week. I did videos on mine. I pulled up one that I was hopefully going to talk about, but it's kind of the same old as before. More ass cancer.
It's good, man.
But so let's see here. Brook had what articles are you talking about, Brook?
Well, let me just kind of introduce myself. For those who aren't familiar, my name is Brook Potter. I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago, living out here in the UK right now. I have to apologize up front for last week. I know Amos labeled me a pussy for this, and I haven't forgot that. But yeah, I was very much under the weather. I still have a cough, so if you see me coughing, Amos has a cough too. But hopefully we could get through the stream. At least we'll fight through it, if anything. And yeah, I mean, I think we covered some of your articles. I'm going to look at basically two that I have here, and I think the bulk of our discussions will be about the transgender issue. And yeah, we'll see how that comes together. I do also apologize. I might have to step away for a brief minute to just let a package into the house. But yeah, we'll see if we get to that. So
yeah,
my two articles will be about the new Doctor Who. I think her name is Jodie Whittaker, is the actress that's been selected to be the technically 14th, but actually 13th Doctor. And then I'm going to be doing an article about a woman that gave her husband HIV and hid it from him, which is always fun. That's always good ass cancer to look at. So I guess like blood AIDS instead, like brain AIDS instead, you know.
Jeez. Well, let's get right to it then.
Let's get to it. What have you got for me, Amos? Bring it on.
Okay. Well, I got the articles, I guess, that I'll be going over. Let's see here. I'm trying to come on, screen share. Oh, here we go. All right, so here we got the article from Yahoo News. They got a little video that's playing in the background. But anyway, so straight from the Capitol, Donald Trump tweeted on Wednesday that transgender people will no longer be allowed to serve in the U.S. military in any capacity. A stunning reversal on the Obama-era policy that affects thousands of service members. Let's see here. So yeah, he tweets, after consultation with my generals and military experts, please be advised that the U.S. government will not accept or allow transgender individuals to serve in any capacity in the U.S. military. Our military must be focused on decisive and overwhelming victory and cannot be burdened with tremendous disruption that transgender in the military would entail. Thank you. So it says the move was not wholly unexpected. It's not clear why Trump decided to announce such a significant policy change via Twitter or when it would take effect. His timing is also odd. He shared in the midst of Senate Republicans' high-stakes fight to repeal Obamacare this week. Yeah, whole other thing there. Trump claims he made the move after consulting with military experts, despite the Pentagon lifting the ban on transgender service members in 2016 after an exhaustive review of its military readiness policies. Our mission is to defend the country, and we don't want barriers unrelated to a person's qualification to serve, preventing us from recruiting or retaining the soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine who can best accomplish the mission. Then Defense Secretary Ashton Carter said, we have to have access to 100% of America's population for our all-volunteer force to be able to recruit from among the most highly qualified and to retain them. So, says here the biggest question is what the news means for thousands of transgender men and women currently serving in the military. There are between 1320 and 6630. So, yeah, 1,320 or 6,630 transgender people in active military service as a Rand Corp study estimate. Another group, the Palm Center, puts the number as high as 15,500 a few years ago. So, before we go any further with that, I'm just for the point of the article and kind of just for simplifying the numbers, 15,000 out of almost 1.5 million people.
Sure. This
is how many people it's affecting. So, I don't know, quick math on that. That's like less than 1%.
Yeah, it's 0.01%. So, yeah.
Yeah, and
that's on the high end anyway.
Yeah, if you want to go on the high end, let's see, 15,000 divided by 1.5 million. Whoops.
Yeah, it's actually 1%. It's 1% almost exactly.
So, first off, I just think from that point, it's 1% of the armed forces. I don't see any. I mean, that's a pretty small thing. I think it's a pretty small percentage. You're gonna cut out 1%. We're gonna get into the costs and such. Talk about that, but you remember when Trump when he was cutting public broadcasting and such?
Right.
Like PBS, and he was cutting a bunch of really small programs that weren't really that big.
Right.
of thinking this is just another one of those.
I mean, that's not really a fair comparison. Just because it's 1% of the armed forces, doesn't really say anything.
I'm just
really
saying from that point, we're gonna look at the cost too.
From that point, it doesn't matter because, you could basically have it 50-50. If it costs nothing for half of it, that's fine. But it really does come down to the cost.
Which we'll look at as well.
That's the real issue.
So then he talks about people will start asking when the ban is going to actually take effect, what's going to happen to transgender troops serving overseas or domestically, basically, just what's going to happen to them. Asking about Trump's pledge as a candidate to fight for the LGBTQ community. Sarah Huckabee Sanders said his decision to ban transgender troops was about military readiness, and the president has been fighting for all Americans. So they're basically avoiding that question because
they don't know. It's just straight up.
I mean, yeah, he's just doing this thing, and overall, it's kind of he could have done it, he couldn't have done it. I don't think it'd make that big of a difference.
Right.
Go further into that too. If those are the only questions we have, we're going to call it a day. So yeah, so that's the whole world is basically flipped out. Well, the country is flipping out because he's done this. The big thing that I was seeing a lot of was, I think it's really just it's political points he's trying to earn. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Because he's been a very unconventional sort of Republican conservative, and now he's gone outside of it. He's kind of working against, the party doesn't really like him that much. I mean, they got to support him, but they're kind of like, hey, what's he doing? And then he does this to kind of earn some points. Someone on my Facebook called it virtue signaling to the evangelical Christians. So
I suppose, but I mean that even that's not a point, because everything a politician does is for political points. So again, I wouldn't necessarily single that out as anything special. That's kind of master of the obvious stuff.
Right. So I mean,
are you saying that the generals did not have any input in this decision? Are you saying that, he lied about consulting the generals?
See, there's that too. I didn't look into that so much. Like, did he? I mean, he tweeted this out. They made the statement, but there hasn't been any actual details.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, the generals did say they're concerned about the cost and the distraction.
Because they're even saying, I mean, further up here, you see like the Pentagon lifted the ban.
Well, they didn't. Obama forced them to recant on the decision. So this is a very recent thing that Obama did, kind of before he left office. And,
right.
The military is concerned about two factors, not whether if the people have the right to serve or not, if they're concerned about the cost and they're concerned about the distraction.
Right.
Right.
So that's one thing we're going to talk about is the cost of.
Yeah, definitely.
What are the costs of the VA, which is, of course, such an efficient organization.
Well, the VA, Veterans Affairs, is something different than medical for the military.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. I think the VA. You see, this is why I'm not fully aware of it. I think the VA has their own budget, but they do draw from. They also get access to a bit of the military. Spending on medical care and stuff like that.
Right.
So it's again, dealing with military, it's not clearly defined, so I'm not an expert on it, but yeah, feel free.
So let's see. One thing is clear is that conservatives have been gunning for this change. The right-wing Family Research Council was among the first out with a statement praising Trump for taking a step. So you see the praise here. And then they start talking about this representative from this Vicky Hartzler, she unsuccessfully tried to deny hormone therapy and gender transition related care to transgender troops. That's the cost thing we're going to be talking about here, because
yeah.
So it goes on just basically talking about, okay, how is everyone reacting to this? And one thing that I thought was interesting was a statement here. I saw the video. It was from Attention News, but I mean, they actually got a clip off of C-SPAN.
Right.
And I found the transcript of that just so it'd be easier. So U.S. Representative Joe Kennedy III from Massachusetts basically slammed Trump for this. And one thing that's really interesting here. So he says here, instead, this morning, our president has told thousands of American soldiers that they will fight for us, but we will not fight for them. That their deeply personal medical decisions are somehow the public's business. That there. Their medical decisions become the public's business when the public is paying for that. That's what he he's trying, this representative was basically trying to appeal to the feelings.
Right.
And say, how can that be how can their decisions be our business? Well, we're paying for it.
Yeah, exactly. The taxpayer is paying for it.
The taxpayers are paying, I don't know how much of it actually is. I still have to look up. I'm going to look at some of the, costs in one of the other articles here, but how the costs, like these costs come out of our pockets. Like,
yeah, it's like 48 billion US dollars goes to military health and like hospitals, doctors, and everything else.
Yeah, and
I mean that's not the overall military budget, but out of the budget, like 48 billion goes towards like healthcare and stuff like that, and that's separate from the VA. The VA has their own budget.
So I'm just looking at it from a perspective of, okay, so the military covering medical expenses of their personnel, injuries, any medical care, anything, just keeping them in tip-top physical shape to serve.
Yes.
And even mental shape.
Yes. Counseling, antidepressants, stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Treating PTSD, treating just anything, really. Not gender hormone transition therapy. Should not be that.
Yeah, I think that's a bit much to ask, because a lot of the other care is like post-mission care. People might be injured in the field. They've seen some shit, PTSD and stuff like that. What you're talking about with gender dysphoria, which is a mental condition, it's a very expensive treatment, right? If it is that you're going to allow the transition. And beyond
in that case,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, my package is here. I got to step out. You go ahead. I'll be right back.
So basically, yeah, gender transition and hormone therapy is pretty expensive. And the fact that we as the taxpayers going against, a lot of people's, not even I don't think much of like a moral thing, but I mean, even just our personal beliefs, we just don't want to support that. If people for example, and then people are going to get confused, what do you mean, like you don't support them? And it's like, in the case where, I personally believe that, transgender people can do whatever they want. They can go pursue and get their own hormone transition therapy and everything. But we as the taxpayers should not be burdened to pay for that, because that is appropriate for the funding of our budget.
Yeah, I'm back with you, bro. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. No, I was just saying, like, people want to go talk about, like, we don't support the transgender people. It's like, you can support the transgender community. You can support their rights to what they want. But when you come into saying, okay, now the public funding, the taxpayer dollar has to go to funding their hormone therapy, that's where it gets, it's not so much, and then people want to go and say, morality and, your morals and such. It's like, no. For example, choice, like I could support you. I'm going to support your right to do whatever you want, but I'm not going to subsidize whatever you want.
Correct.
That's very different. It seems to be something that a lot of the left doesn't quite understand, is having the freedom to do something and financially supporting that thing are two completely separate things.
Exactly.
And so now they're saying, their deeply personal medical decisions are somehow the public's business. Well, they are when our dollars are going to it.
Correct.
Legislation to allow transgender people to do or whatever the heck they want and allow them to exist and, freely without, the government, restricting them or anything. But when I have to go fund what they're doing, that's a wholly separate thing.
I mean, have you ever seen the list of things that disqualify you for service?
I have not, no.
It's huge, right? It's just, everything from diabetes to if you're into voyeurism. I mean, just it's a very extensive list. And the reason for that is because the military is not about the individual. The military is a cohesive unit that has to work together to accomplish a mission. The individual, unfortunately, doesn't really have a lot of rights in the military, setup. And it's the reason they don't let certain people with diabetes, for instance, into the military. They're as much willing to serve, but the government is going to have to pick up all of the insulin and whatever other kind of medical care they have for this person in order for them to just be functionally normal.
You're looking, you're looking at a person for more, military readiness plays into that. Like, you got to be healthy, you got to be clear-headed, There's not so much to say about what happens after you come back, with PTSD and everything, but would they, they want you to be, they need you to be tip-top shape.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
I think that's completely within the rights of the generals to set their criteria.
Right, and
what we're talking about here with the transgender thing, at least it appears that this is pre-combat effect medical procedures, meaning that these people can begin their transition stage. Even it's not like something that's going to affect them only after they've seen military combat or something like that. This is actually something that could affect them even before they get onto the battlefield.
Right. So what I was looking at, I remember a video I saw a while back. There was when they started talking about this transgender in the military issue before Trump, there was they interviewed a guy in the Army, I think, and he was just saying, he's a transgender man, so was a woman, and he was serving in the military alongside, out over in, I think it was in the Middle East. I mean, he did well. He served with his group of guys, and they all accepted him as a man. They had no idea.
Right.
And, that was sort of, the video was sort of appealing to go and say, hey, they can do just as good a job. This guy got through and no one knew. It's something, basically saying because of this, we shouldn't discriminate against him. And I agree with that.
Sure, I also agree with that.
Yeah. So this is where I'm where I'm not taking the sides. It's the government, I think Trump, I think we should, allow transgenders into the military, but we should not subsidize or fund anything relating to that.
I agree.
So obviously, so they still have to meet the physical requirements and the mental requirements. If gender dysphoria and they're clear-headed or clear-minded enough to meet the military's requirements, sure, go for it. When this broad stroke is being drawn by the left to start going and saying, well, no, we got to support everything about them because they're willing to fight for our rights, we got to fight for their rights. It's like rights and privileges are different.
Correct. They don't have a right to be in the military, right? It's a privilege to serve in the military.
Right. And they're kind of saying, you know, we got to fight for them. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, we'll fight for them to be in there. We're not going to fight for them to be in there and funded to do the things that we shouldn't be funding because of their own choices.
Well, I mean, it's kind of hard to say that gender dysphoria is their own choice, but I understand the point you're making in that if they
the point,
that should not be coming at the military expense. And I think this is part of the issue of the incentives behind this program.
So,
is I think the general. Sure.
So I was just gonna say. So you're talking, like gender dysphoria choice. Okay. I don't think the military would allow schizophrenics into the military.
Now, if you develop schizophrenia while you're in the military, that's different. But they would not necessarily recruit you with schizophrenia, correct?
Because like we talked about, the cost that it's going to come with.
Correct.
So if you're post-transition transgender person, if you're a post-transition trans person in the military and you're good to go, fine.
I'd be more inclined to support that, although they still have hormones that they need to take pretty much for the rest of their life, and that is pretty expensive.
But I'm just saying is where if it's not being, I'm talking about just the burden that it puts on the military funding. So if you're going in there and you're able to function and operate as military personnel the same way as your, you know, if you want to call cisgendered counterparts,
right? Yeah, sure. I have no problem with that.
Go for that. But these are the details. These are the things that need to be broken down when you have this discussion that the media, that a lot of the public is not really going for. They're just going for the broad strokes, for the overall just, hey, this is news. This is buzzwords.
They're making it into a human rights issue when it's really not.
Right.
In the military, you do not have like the right to free speech as much as, or like the right to property. You know, everything you own in there is on loan from the U.S. government, right? It's like you do not own your machine gun, you do not own the boots, the glasses, the clothes that you wear. It's all returned. You know, so military is a little different when it comes to issues of liberty and these kinds of things.
Right. So I looked up in the Atlantic for medical costs.
Right.
And so yeah, it's talking about the same thing. Here we go. So the military has not historically covered gender transition surgeries, though Barack Obama did announce plans for it to begin doing so. Well, thank God we're still not going to do that. At least we hope we won't. That cost would be between 2.4 and 8.4 million annually for transition-related costs.
Well, that
according
number
to a RAND analysis.
Right. That simply cannot be right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean. But okay, finish the paragraph and then I'll say why that can't be right.
Yeah. Commissioned by the Department of Defense, the group estimated between 1,320 and 6,630 active duty transgender service people currently. See, how do they not know the exact numbers?
Well, it's don't ask, don't tell, right? So they don't actually have to say, you know.
And that's the interesting part is if they're already in there and we haven't even started funding them, they should be fine.
I think a few of them have started the funding, which is why it's become a concern.
Okay. So, study in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2015 put that number at 12,800 people and $4.2 to $5.6 million, concluding that doctors agree that such care is medically necessary.
Right.
Right. Okay. So, I
want to look at those figures though, because that's just pure propaganda. If they're saying that it's going to cost at the high end, what was it? 8.6 million?
8.4. Yep.
8.4. Okay, so let's just take, for instance, 100 people out of the 6,630. So we're going to take the high end. All right. let's just say 100 people decide they're going to transition in a year. The average cost of the transition from male to female, I think, is, I don't know, maybe just over 100,000. For female to male, it might be just under 100,000. So let's just say $100,000 just for the surgery. If you take 100 people a year that require this surgery at $100,000 each, that's $10 million. So that's way above the 8.4 million that they're discussing.
Right.
And if we take the figures from, and that's not even including like hormones, counseling, they get like a year post-op that, you know, they don't have to do anything, which means while they can't be deployed, they have to be replaced with another person. So these figures are clearly propaganda. I don't know where they got this from. I think they probably took the actuary numbers from insurance companies that adjust for people who might want to do that. But the military doesn't pay by insurance. The military pays out of pocket. So that's just pure garbage. And
so so it says here this would be military healthcare spending increase of 0.04 to 0.13%. Even in the most extreme case, it is 1/10 of the annual $84 million that the military spends on medication for erectile dysfunction. So they're basically saying like, hey, we spend more money on boner pills than hormone pills.
Right. I don't know how they got that figure. I'd actually like to click on that link and see. But even that's not necessarily accurate, depending on who it is that's serving. If you take the whole budget, right, the $48 billion US that's spent on healthcare every year, and you divide that by the 1.2 to 1. Let's say 1. I think I did the figure for 1.2 active service people. That's $38,000 per person a year. Now that doesn't take into account hospitals, doctors, nurses, and all this other thing. That's just like direct care that each active service member is allowed to basically spend.
Right.
So if you're telling me that one person is going to basically cost 3 times as much than the average person, that's the cost concern. Why would you choose the 3 times more expensive person when you could get just a normal healthy person and you know, allot them the 33,000?
Yeah, and then so we go into even more details to break down is to say like, okay, as much as the military is part of the government, they still have to look at it as being cost effective. The military, I'd say, is one of the few organizations within the government that is more efficient. And they got to look at the cost.
That's debatable.
Well, I mean, you got to get good at killing and protecting. So, but I mean, you know what I'm getting at. But I mean, they gotta look at the overall cost of taking care of the people that are serving under them. So, I mean,
yeah,
we're not going to go and say that. What is it? We're not. No one is going to go. No one has ever gone against the government, as far as I've remembered, to go and say the military is ableist.
Right.
But they're going to go and say, well, the government, the military is now transphobic, probably.
Right. Yeah.
So,
but I mean, you see, the incentive in the military. Like my sister actually has a connection with the VA, and Veterans Affairs, they need to focus on cures. They need to solve medical problems because unlike in public healthcare where pharmacies probably want customers who are going to take pills for the rest of their life, the VA actually has an incentive to not waste medical costs.
Yeah.
Because as we know, the veterans that are in the US are treated terribly, and unnecessary spending on basically what amounts to cosmetic surgery is not the best way to spend their money.
Right.
I mean, if I was the general, that's how I'd be selling it, right? Yes, it's a very expensive treatment. But when you consider that, again, I don't know if the VA is still pulling money from this fund or not, but when you consider those options, no, I think quite rightly, you might want to side with a group of people who do not require that amount of expenditure.
And that's the big issue here. It's mainly expenditure. I think expenditure actually plays probably a larger role than overall. As Trump is calling it, is just expenditure, which they're not really taking into account, and it's difficult because everyone's quoting different numbers here. So then, of course, they're throwing in these big numbers to kind of cost by saying, Department of Budget, DoD budget as a whole expected to be proposed at $640 billion. The F-35 program is $1.5 trillion. And military bands cost taxpayers $437 million. So they're going and saying, there's all these big numbers, and look at this teeny tiny number over here that Trump is. So it goes, yeah. So it says, of course, not only is it false that medical costs of transgender soldiers would be prohibitive, it's wrong. Vast majority of medical costs among people of any gender in America are the same: heart disease, dementia, diabetes, and cancers. Well, duh. Those affect everyone. If costs are concerned,
if you have any of those, you can't get into the military.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what's funny. Can't have any of these.
No, if you develop it, it's of course a different story, and I keep saying that to people. But yeah, you can't get into the military with these conditions.
Yeah. The diseases that do seem to disproportionately afflict transgender people are mental health issues. Gee, I wonder why. The pathology behind this is abetted by societal marginalization. So blame everything. Really, I don't get that. I mean, we talked about gender dysphoria. The transgender population, I think, suffers 45% suicide rate, whereas the rest of the population suffers less than 5%.
Yeah, but ironically, it's very high in the military just in general. Military suicides are very high as well.
Right. So that's another thing too. Right. Yeah. Because now you have, let's just go to that upper number again of 15,000 people. 45% of them are going to kill themselves.
Possibly.
Statistically, are possible. So they're factoring in these numbers. It's why are we going to keep,
And it should be noted, even post-op, those numbers are still very high, which means the surgery itself does not necessarily fix the issues. But yeah, go ahead, make the point.
So we're talking about all these numbers, and it's you want to go talk about cold, cruel. The word cruel was thrown around about how Trump was going after this, and I think, well, you want to talk cruel, you got to talk. It's numbers when it comes to the military. They're looking at, okay, we have. On the upper end, we might have 15,000 people in our 1.5 million, 1.4 actually it is, but I just rounded up to 1.5.
Sure.
1.4 million people, and half of those, before we even bring them in,
correct,
could kill themselves.
Correct.
And then afterwards,
and they're going to cost anywhere from $100,000 to $150,000 to keep them.
That's going to cost money if we start funding them for these other things, and they're going to get they might get PTSD, which raises their chance of suicide even higher. We're not getting much of a bang for our buck when it comes to these military service people.
Correct.
People are going to start thinking, well, that's cruel, and that's, you're not considering the person. That's, but it's well, you have to look at it from the military standpoint, and I'm sorry, this is about one of the few places where you really have to look at it just like that.
I would agree. I would, the military is not a fashion show. It is designed for the purpose of defending the country, and as well as, winning whatever conflicts or policing whatever it is. And on top of that, this brings us to the second issue that the generals were raising, was this issue of distraction. And we talk about the morale amongst the troops and stuff like that. And it's hard enough if a normal person in the troop and stuff like that commits suicide, that's terrible. We shouldn't have that. But it's even more kind of, demoralizing in a sense if it's related to something like this. It's even compounding and confusing and bringing issues into a unit that's really trying to have like groupthink, and it's supposed to be like a homogenous group. And if I was a general, it's just an unnecessary complication, especially if you want to keep costs down, keep morale high. It has nothing against them individually. It's unnecessary when we could be focusing on what we have, healthy people that aren't going to cost as much.
Yeah, it's introducing elements pose a problem when in reality those problems can be minimized by just, unfortunately,
Correct.
just not allowing some of these people to serve. Once again, I think, like I told you about that, there was the one transgender man that could make it.
Sure.
If they can make it, great. But
sure, if they're post-op and they're serving, or if they want to serve on the front lines, I think that's fine. If they want to serve in an administrative capacity, I think that's fine as well, as long as the state is not funding it.
Yeah. So it says the pathology behind, so it talks about, well, it's the marginalization that causes them to be, have mental health issues. It has nothing to do with the fact that gender dysphoria has actually been diagnosed as a mental condition.
Yeah, even outside. You can't be like, if you're just straight, you're not marginalized. You need to be out of step with that to be marginalized in the first place. They're putting the cart before the horse.
I mean, here you want to conflate. You want to just throw all these, to say, well, it's because of all this. It's like, okay, well, the left likes to say, they like to lump together things like transphobia, Islamophobia, racism into the same category.
Right.
The rest of the population has less than 5%. I think, I forgot the exact number. It's like less than 5% suicide rate. The transgender population has 45%. That number I remember.
Yeah, between 40 and 45 is right. Yeah, well, that's what I remember.
The rest of the population deals with the other two, racism and Islamophobia. If you want to say that, throw those buzzwords out there.
Sure.
Yet they don't have high suicide rates.
Yeah.
So there's and they experience this racism that is on the level of transphobia, marginalization, the whole thing. It's like,
I'd be careful with that because we can't really compare one group to another. But I understand the point you're making is that lots of groups.
If the left is going to lump, lots of groups get marginalized. Lots of groups, and the left wants
the suicide rates as reflected amongst the transgender community. I agree.
And the left wants to lump them all together as the same kind of marginalized, super marginalized group of people.
Yeah.
But there's a clear difference in the numbers. So he says portraying transgender people as a burden to the mission with a focus on medical costs as in euphemism for gender reassignment surgeries. Well, yeah,
it is.
and they're like, oh, he's just, it's a euphemism. It's like, yeah, because it does cost money.
And this is another point that, again, this is why I was kind of nitpicking to you about the 1% of the population, right? So again, let's just say that there are 100 transgenders that decide to transition. And okay, so they have the pre-hormonal treatment, then they go on to the surgery, and then they have post-op recovery. That means 1% of your fighting force, a portion of your fighting force is out of commission. They cannot serve, which means they have to be replaced with somebody else.
And here's another thing too. Let's say, because what was the exact number we came up with for if, let's say, 100 of those people from beginning to end of like their gender?
Well, we don't actually have a number for that. Just the surgery for 100 people would be about $10 million. So it only takes 400 to be more than Viagra, right?
Yeah. So 10 million
for 100 people just to do surgery.
So what can you? How much? So what can you do with $10 million for let's say, a bunch of non-transgender service people, servicemen.
Yeah,
I
I
would
mean,
just
that could go towards prosthetic limbs. It could go towards antidepressants. It could go towards a lot of things that are not cosmetic in nature. Even better equipment. I mean, it's not going to do a lot.
life-saving surgeries, saving lives instead of making.
Exactly. Instead of just it is cosmetic surgery. At the end of the day, that's what it is. It's a very expensive cosmetic surgery as a treatment that's not even guaranteed, because even post-op transgender folks still commit suicide. So that's a lot of money.
Let's put it this way too. So I'm just saying that if we set the precedent and we start saying,
you want to switch back to the camera while we talk about this?
Yeah, right. Here I am. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, let's just say the precedent is set and the transgender population gets funding to, they get funded and subsidized to have their gender reassignment surgery, which we have concluded is essentially cosmetic surgery. We have yet to come up with an actual way to turn a man into a woman 100% of the way, or the other way around.
Correct.
Cosmetic change to deal with their gender dysphoria, make them feel better, things like that, which is not proven to actually happen. But let's just say we do that. So if a female serviceman, which we do allow in the military, wants to feel more confident and feel better, do we fund a boob job for her?
Interesting premise. It's not medically necessary. But you're right. It can actually open up a can of worms in terms of what is permissible for military service. You're actually quite right. I don't think it would get to that, and I think they're trying to prevent that kind of Pandora's box, for want of a better word.
What I'm just saying is that's just an argument to look at, is to get people to
exactly.
Really consider it.
And I mean, it goes beyond that. Like, if the military, I think is what ended up happening, right? How many it was right, about 1% is the population right now,
maybe less.
If a lot of transgender folks actually believed that the government was going to pay for their transition surgery, they're going to get an influx of transgender folks applying for the position. And probably, maybe not a huge influx, but probably more than before, right?
They
don't really have a benchmark because it's only just been permitted. But if you allow the trend to continue, I'm sure a lot of them would go in just for the purposes of getting their surgery.
Now, no offense to people who are in the armed forces or going to serve, but there are a lot of benefits to serving in the military, such as there's educational benefits, there's financial benefits. They're taken care of very well by the government, which I think is all well deserved.
Yeah, I agree. They get special rates and all sorts of from the parents, everything.
Yeah, people join the military for a lot of those benefits too. Beyond, I think I've heard, there's different kinds of people that join the military. Those that are patriotic, love of country. Those that want the benefits. People that are just want something to do. It's a good thing. Sure. And all these things, I think, are very useful in a very basic sense that help and take care of this.
Sure.
For those reasons, there are people who join for financial security that they can get from the military.
Yeah, I'd agree with
that. In that same way, now you're going to have, like you said, some transgender people that are going to think they're going to basically find out if my transgender, my transition hormone therapy is going to be covered military because I can't afford it on my own.
Correct.
My Kickstarter or Indiegogo didn't quite fill up with the funding needed to do it.
I mean, obviously not all transgender, but yeah, it is an incentive. And when you given as an incentive, you will get people responding to it. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, that's just how things work.
Yeah, especially if there's a financial incentive, or I know like in the US, a lot of like the poorer communities, like the way out of poverty is considered the military. You join the military. and you get
And
funding for
again,
college, and all that kind of
and
stuff.
people, a lot of people, some people kind of look down on that. Not to say it's a bad thing, but there are people that look down and go, "Oh, you're just in it for the money, or you can't fix your life on your own." They say all sorts of things, and I think, no. It's the military. It's a privilege, but it also has a lot of good benefits. I tried to get into the military at one point, didn't quite work out, but I mean, it's just one of those things. You go in there knowing full well, and it's public knowledge, knowing full well that the military takes care of its people. So, yeah, the precedent is really intriguing if that is set to say that we're going to take care of transgenders and transgendered people and their surgeries. And
it's a huge commitment, and I think if the generals, I mean, again, this is brand new. Nobody knows anything about this. This has just happened. There's not a lot of research on this. As again, I could only point to like a recent couple studies that suggested that that women serving in male regiments and male platoons and stuff, integrated platoons tend to function a little worse than like the all men. And I was actually having this conversation with a friend of mine, and it's a lot about the group dynamics of men. That when they're in a group and they're mission focused, they tend to focus on the mission. They don't, there's a kind of brotherhood. But the minute you introduce women into that equation, they start to compete for the woman's attention. It's very, very unusual. I'm not saying that's always the case. Yeah, I know it sounds sexist. I'm not saying that's always the case, but yeah, sometimes where it counts. Like I think they did a recent study, and I think like in some areas in terms of like tactical understanding, and sometimes like hiking and a lot of other things, the integrated group actually worked better. But the psychologist basically said, well, yeah, because all of the men want to impress the women and they don't give up as easily, so they push themselves further in that regard. But when it came
get
to like
a little bit of
stuff, yeah, they get a testosterone boost, right? But when it came to the tactical stuff, like the killing and the targeting and like munitions handling and stuff like that, the all male platoons and the groups and stuff performed well, maybe not way better, but better than the diversity groups and stuff like that. And a lot of that could just play back to human psychology. If we understand male, female, gender dynamics and stuff like that, a lot of it's explained. Now that's the closest thing we have to a study about diversity. Obviously, this is different because this is transgender, and I guess it speaks a little bit to the distraction that these generals are worried about. And as I say, there's an issue about morale. There's an issue about, you don't want to introduce complicated things into what is basically a very simple, homogenous group. So I could understand that argument. There's just not enough data. There's not enough to say whether it's necessarily a good or a bad thing. I could just point to the cost and say, like, I could understand the cost. I could understand the argument about distraction. There's very little to suggest that, it's going to be otherwise.
Being in the military, though, they talk about like they break you down, then rebuild you back up into this.
Oh, they don't do that anymore. No, they've stopped doing that. I think in early 2000s, that kind of thing, that thinking, that whole thing, that's done. It's now a compassionate military. It's very different. Yeah.
Okay.
Because my sister, as I said, she's technically a major in the Air Force, even though she's a research scientist working for the VA. And she talked about that, like after the first Iraq conflict and the second Iraq conflict and stuff like that, they don't do that kind of break you down to build you back up kind of thing again. They realize it mentally, some of the guys, it was just causing more problems.
Well, never mind then. I was going to make a point with that. I think I actually did. Hear.
Make the point anyway. I mean, even though it may not.
Well, maybe even they're not like as harsh, when it comes to their basic training. But they're still, training you to be tough. They're still training you to, be a cohesive unit. And I think when you have a person who's mentally, because gender identity seems to be a really big part of a lot of these people. introducing that into an environment where you have to forsake a lot of those.
Yeah, I'd agree.
They kind of conflict with each other. I think with the objectives kind of conflict with each other. Where, like I said, nothing against transgender people that want to serve,
Sure.
but that are outside of how a system has been working for years.
Well, yeah, a couple of centuries at least.
Yeah, the military has been working a certain way for a very long time, and overall, you just have way for a long time now. Am I going ahead and saying, because it's worked this way, therefore it always has to work that way? But
it's the philosophy of if it's not broke, don't fix it, sort of thing.
Yeah. If like I said, you want to have a cohesive, sort of congruent, sort of just a unit that works together with nothing real different. Everyone has different backgrounds, obviously. But when you introduce something like transgender, like you said, introduce something like a woman, things get complicated and things can fall short of the goals you want to meet, fall short of the standards that they have. And that's a big thing too, is they have to meet certain standards if they want to serve. If they sit down with, I don't know if there's a sort of a psych evaluation part of joining the military, but
definitely.
There has to be,
yeah.
And and the psychologist just sees that you have some conflicting, identities. We'll just say that.
Right.
They might deem you as a risk that they can't have. So I'm looking at the transgender people who are in the armed forces. They obviously met those criteria and they're in there.
Well, the rules changed in 2016. They were no longer excluded for being transgender, so they took the criteria of gender dysphoria off the exclusion list. So yeah, as I said, this is all very recent.
There have been those in there that got through that, though. That don't ask, don't tell. They didn't know.
Those were the gays and stuff like that, and I guess to some degree, maybe a couple of them might have had gender dysphoria. They probably, I don't know, maybe we don't know enough, honestly.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's too soon to really draw any kind of serious conclusion. But I could understand the cost. I could understand the morale of the troops. So I don't think Trump is necessarily in the wrong. I mean, he did say he consulted the generals, and I think the figure that they're pushing around to say that it's only going to be 8 point something million, that's just not, that clearly is just propaganda.
Yeah, and so like I said, I look at it as let them serve, but don't pay for their gender reassignment surgery.
Yeah, I would say let them serve only. I'll agree with that and add to that, but they can only get on the front lines if they meet the criteria for
you need criteria. You need criteria. You need standards.
Right, and if not, let them serve as an administrative kind of role. I don't have a problem with that. If they want to
put them to where they're suited. Even in the article, it goes further and it says, thousands of talented Americans are ineligible for service. And I think, that is, I think, a kind of a thing that they're losing out on, is there are people that are transgender that they can offer to the military.
Sure, I agree. But I mean, this is what they don't mention. There are other ways to get into the military rather than just direct recruitment. And as I say, my sister, she's not in the military formally, but because of her research job and her work at the VA and stuff like that, she has been assigned the rank of major. And she technically is in the hierarchy. Like, they will salute her. But she's a scientist, right? She's a research scientist. So it's not cut and dry. And as I say, a lot of the doctors and stuff like that work for the VA, they're doctors. But they're not necessarily serving on the front lines. So again, the kind of pinning it to the recruitment issue is a little dishonest. There are other ways that they can get in that don't require boot camp. You
could be some sort of like a civilian third-party contractor kind of person.
Yeah, exactly.
Like when I was being interviewed to get into the military, I had to sit down with a bunch of majors and colonels and majors and colonels, and some civilians.
Right.
So
the contractors and some
people that work with. I mean, there were like doctors and professors and such. But I mean, if you really want to go and help in some way, you could also go serve in private contracting. Lots of former military go join contracting. There's contractors that probably hire on people that are not in the military, civilians that get added on, and they still go over to the Middle East. They still go.
Hello? Amos, you still there, man? All right, guys, it looks like we're having some technical issues here. I'm going to see if I can just find out what's going on with Amos. I don't know if you're hearing me or if you're not hearing me. Let's see what's going on. What happened? All right, guys, we seem to be having some technical issues. So with that said, I'm going to just try and get into contact with Amos really quickly and see if he follows up. But I guess, all right, I'll take a quick look at I think he's lost his internet connection. Oh, the poor guy. All right, so I'm going to take a quick look at some of my articles here. And let me see if he actually joins us in a few minutes. Okay, let me see. Where am I here? So as many of you guys know, some of my article was actually about, there we go. Oh, the screen share is giving trouble. Just what I need. Okay, so hopefully you guys can see this. I don't know if you can or can't. Let's see. Right, so for those of you who don't know, in recent times, the Doctor Who franchise out here in the UK has actually appointed themselves the 13th Doctor, which is going to actually be played by an actress from Broadchurch, which was a show that I actually used to watch. I think her name is Jodie Whittaker, I think is her name. And, you would think that a lot of the feminists and a lot of the people out there would actually be very pleased with this whole thing. But unfortunately, one of the antagonists in this entire thing, Anita Sarkeesian, she came out and actually kind of criticized it. Oh, wait, is Amos? Amos, you back, man?
Yeah, that internet kind of dropped out for some reason. So I don't know what happened. It literally just dropped off for a second, and then it came back on. So you just kept going, huh?
Well, yeah, I took a few minutes to kind of figure out. I tried to reach you and stuff like that. I said, okay, well, I'll just, I'll present my article in the meantime.
Right. Well, you keep going.
Yeah, all right.
Keep going with your article there.
I mean, we was having a good discussion about the whole Trump thing, so I didn't really want to stop that. But yeah, let's do this, and we could probably just wrap back to the to the Trump thing afterwards. Just let me know if you could see that, man. So as I was saying that, the new Doctor Who has now been, described. She's a woman now. I think her name is Jodie Whittaker, right? I think that's her name. Right, Jodie Whittaker. And you would think that a female Doctor would get the praise and the acclaim of like all the wonderful feminists that are out there. But our favorite adversary in this space, Anita Sarkeesian, of noteworthy fame from her recent incident at VidCon with Sargon of Akkad called Benjamin, she actually went off to have some issues about, the fact that the diversity was not, the main actress was not diverse enough. So in saying it here, it needs to be said that Doctor Who is still overwhelmingly a white show and that issues of representation do not exist in isolation from each other, tweeted Anita Sarkeesian, a Canadian-American feminist of Armenian heritage known for her activism at comic book conventions. It's not as if you fix the woman problem, then fix the race problem, then the queer/trans problem, etc. It all has to be done in tandem. Excuse me. In short, basically, she's saying that, it's not good enough that Jodie Whittaker is taking on the role of the Doctor. She would actually prefer if the person was not just a woman, but also a woman of color, preferably trans or queer, and, even potentially, Muslim, as the case might be, seeing as the left just loves to kind of, pander up those oppression points with, our Muslim friends. But ironically from that, she might actually be pretty pleased with today's article from The Star that might actually add to that whole discussion where, The Star in the US is basically the National Enquirer of the UK in a lot of ways. But they're actually hinting that, the female Doctor Who is actually going to be bisexual and have a lesbian affair. So, hopefully that will calm, Anita Sarkeesian and the bunch of feminists that are out there. Hopefully that should kind of, bring them to pause. But that's kind of what's going on out here. For those of you who don't know, the Doctor Who is one of the longest running sci-fi series out here in the UK. It's produced basically by the BBC, which is very much the far left propaganda wing out here. And they've totally bought into a lot of the social justice and, progressive ideology and stuff like that. And the show has been tanking. I used to watch the show up until probably season 9 with, the early introduction of Peter Capaldi, who was the last Doctor. And for his second season, I kind of weighed off on that. I wasn't too thrilled with, a lot of the writing and other things. So the show has been suffering. But a lot of the fans are quite upset that, it's come down to this, where they basically have to resort to bisexual doctors and lesbian affairs to actually make the show of any kind of worth to watch. So yeah, kind of disappointed, but that's where we're at.
Virtue signaling to the max.
It doesn't get much worse than that, man. Like, it's a sci-fi series. You can do anything, and it's a time travel, series. And you're telling me that you have to resort to lesbian sex to get people to watch. This is crazy.
Well, we're trying to get their oppression points, trying to be more progressive. And what was it? The movie Dunkirk is not diverse enough.
Right. Yeah. Based on the Normandy invasion, isn't it, or something like that?
Yeah. Next they're gonna say like Batman needs to be black, trans, and poor. Actually, because
did you see that the new Batman is actually going to be the villain, and the Joker is going to be the hero?
Wait, what?
Because this is a real thing. Because all billionaires are evil. There is actually a stream of comic book where Batman is the villain and the Joker is the good guy.
Jesus.
Yeah, as if social justice didn't destroy Marvel enough, it looks like DC is looking to kind of follow down that road.
Marvel isn't going too quickly. I think.
Well, the comic books are suffering, and Spider-Man is suffering. Yeah,
but the movies though are okay.
I think the movies are good. I think they learned their lesson with the Spider-Man. It had like the second week it really dropped off. Like
Right. I heard
pretty
something
bad.
about a couple of social justice kind of things they threw in there, but I
Have you
think
seen
it's
it?
like I have not. But people
Okay,
just from people that have been commenting on it, they said like it wasn't like in your face. It was more just sort of thrown in like a little humor. Like it was talking about more. There was some scene where like they were going to the Washington Monument, and they said, I'm not going to go into something that slaves built. And then, like, slaves didn't build that. And then, like, security guard, I guess, gave a little,
kind of
like,
nod.
well,
Yeah.
it wasn't like, like, I mean, definitely there's the Mary Jane is a black woman thing. And, and of course, Spider-Man has, like, an Asian fat friend and stuff. And it's like, well, I mean, kids have friends. Someone like Peter Parker would have a friend like that. It's not outside the realm of possibility that he just had, because he's kind of a nerd. Persona.
Yep.
He's just a better looking nerd because he's the main character of a movie.
Sure.
But it's like that's not like too outside. Now, if you had like a crippled trans black Muslim friend, then it'd be like, okay, this is in our face.
Yeah. And again, we have nothing against crippled people of color Muslim friends at all.
Definitely.
It's just when everybody, when you're putting it into the movie just for diversity points and you're not really focusing on telling a good story, it does tend to detract. And I mean, I saw it. I saw the movie. I went with a friend of mine to watch it. Yeah, I mean, it was all right. I didn't think it necessarily suffered too badly. But I definitely did notice, the SJW stuff that was in there. And yeah, you shouldn't mess with something that's classic.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's where Marvel definitely lost the plot in terms of replacing the characters with all of these new characters, like the female black Iron Man, and Thor was suddenly transformed into Mary Jane, and it's a woman now, and they got rid of the classic characters, which is the worst thing you could do with the movies, because anybody who's watching the movies and wants to follow these characters, they have nothing to look at. So if they'd done it as separate, it should have been fine,
Right. We talked about like how, for example, you have Supergirl and The Flash, and
right.
The Flash, I think, is an awesome show. And and then if you look at the show, you see Iris West, who in the comics was actually white. She's a black girl, and but they don't make that a big deal. They don't kind of say that she's not like she doesn't have a house full of African relics, and it's and they're eating authentic. They're not pushing it. Like, it's there. Yeah. We see it. We see the diversity. Like, they're earning their diversity points, but they're not. It's not. We looked at like how TV shows and movies. When people make these kinds of, they put this in the shows. There's a way of making it seem to just come across as it's relatable. It's normal. It feels natural as part of the story.
Yeah.
As you have Supergirl, which spends 2 or 3 episodes a season talking about how her sister is lesbian and she's having this identity crisis and she's doing this whole thing. And it's like, great, she can be a lesbian. That's great. But why does the story have to revolve around the issue around that rather than the show, the story, hey, Supergirl, an alien girl struggling to, adapt and be Supergirl and this news report at the same time, and trying to measure up to her cousin Superman and all this stuff, and just the the superheroes, the villains and stuff like that. No, we got to do a whole episode about her sister. We got to do a whole feminist episode. We got to do a whole thing about just a bunch of social justice shoved into your face. And there's a difference in there because the audience knows it's being shoved in their face.
Yeah,
it's a very clear, like, we're making a point here, and it doesn't fit into the story. It doesn't feel natural. Whereas the Flash, they have different things going on. They have equally male and female. They have different colored people. They have all this stuff going on, and it's just part of the story.
Correct.
There's still the story progresses on without having to stop and make a point.
I think you know, for the DC, I think they've been creaming for the opportunity to have a female character, so that they can do all the social justice stuff for women. Because in the male characters, okay, so DC, sorry, Warner Brothers, so they have the CW. They have Arrow, Flash, Legends of Tomorrow. Do they have any others? I think those are the three. And then they just got Supergirl. They bought that from CBS.
They're also going to have a new one.
Oh, really? What's that one?
What's it called here? The CW is.
Sorry?
Black Lightning.
Black Lightning. Oh,
Black
they're
Lightning
basically going to do Static Shock.
Yeah, it's like a Static Shock, which, and see, there's another thing too. When I watched the Static Shock the cartoon, issues because I mean it was you know, Static Shock was definitely like he was where he was very much like an inner city black kid who had superpowers, and he was dealing with a lot of different things. So they had to put that in. Even
Sure.
watching the show, they had intense moments, but it was like intense normal moments. It wasn't like intense social justice in your face moments like we're trying to push an agenda here. It was like because he had a friend, he had a white friend, and who liked rap music, and they were really cool with each other, and like he brought rap music home, but then his dad is like kind of racist and doesn't like black people and thinks rap music is violent and such, which is very typical, which is a lot of the concerns at the time by the public. It wasn't like just, you know, only the super racist would have this. A lot of people had concerns about rap music because it's a very intense music genre. The show, and you know, it was a cartoon, and it wasn't like, you know, he wasn't dropping N-words. It wasn't like he was, you know, thing of just, you know, showing, you know, racism is super, super, super ugly, and you got to know that it's out there. It's like, well, it was just like, okay, people had these concerns. This is a normal family. This is what happens.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, the point I was going to make with the CW is, you know, they're trying to push a bit of that agenda, but it can't work. Mostly because I think the audience that is watching a lot of these shows are basically men. They're not really getting into it. So like for instance, in the, I think in the Arrow, they introduced a character, I think that's some kind of techno or something like that. He worked at one of the places. He was a black guy who was very good with technology, but he was also gay. And they kind of, I don't know if that's part of the storyline in the comic books and stuff like that. But Supergirl gave them the opportunity to really push all of that feminism agenda in one shot, right? The Cat Grant character being the top CEO, she gets to bitch about all the problems that supposedly successful women do. You know, you got the most powerful woman on the planet, you know, dealing with everyday life and stuff like that, and she's supposed to have like this high perception of, you know, how Earthlings should be interacting, such as, you know, that's why she's always commenting on, you know, the lesbian stuff. But the truth is, the CW had no other outlet to push any of that. And ironically, it wasn't even their things to start with. It started with CBS, which is through Disney. Well, I think there's an agreement with Disney or something. But yeah, it started with CBS, and as we know, that whole Disney thing is just flooded with the SJW stuff. And we see, because CBS did the new Star Trek as well, didn't they? Oh, Amos, have I lost you again, man? Oh, that's tough, man. But yeah, for anybody watching, I think the CBS station is owned by the same company with Disney, and as a result, they pushed a lot of this kind of, and as I say, Disney owns Marvel, which again is this whole kind of circle of the SJW thing. And the recent Star Trek that's coming out, I think it's Star Trek Discovery or something like that. Apparently it was, and I mean, let's be real, in the Star Trek universe, there's the opportunities for all sorts of flexible gender dynamics, and they pushed it really hard to the point where I don't even think they're airing it on television anymore. I think it's going straight to Netflix. But yeah, that whole thing again shows, the industry is really trying to push this thing because they think this is what the youth are into. And for the most part, I think the silent majority of us, we're not having it. And again, I think that's why the Spider-Man has suffered. At the same time, I think it's possible people are kind of getting tired of the Marvel thing. It's become quite a formula, and people, it's over 10 years, I think, of Marvel movies and stuff like that. So yeah, it's quite something. Oh, I think, have we lost Amos? Amos is gone again. I think, all right, hopefully he'll be back shortly. All right, well, to close it out, I will put up my last article, which yeah, this is just some pure ass cancer at this point. So yes, I will present this to everyone. So ladies and gentlemen, the last article before we close out the stream is basically a story from a website called Eve Woman, where a lady basically gave her husband HIV. And for those of you who don't know, HIV is the precursor to the AIDS virus. And in the story, she goes on to basically say how she infected her husband and how she responded when she got caught with this whole thing. I think is just incredible. But to make a long story short, basically she was involved in a relationship where she met this gentleman and she was infected by the guy that she was with. So here we go. I'm a woman in my early 40s. I was tested positive 10 years ago, but the viral load was low enough that they put her on a Septrin, and good nutrition. And that was long before government moved to put all people that tested HIV positive on an antiretroviral treatment. My son was also lucky enough to be HIV negative. He was only 6 years old when his father died, and we were left only with each other for consolation. So she got infected by her husband, who was kind of a slutty guy. He didn't want to get tested. He denied the infection and stuff like that. Eventually, he passed away. And so it was basically left with her and her son. And, her life kind of went on just normally and stuff like that until she ended up working for a company, where is this, with a rather abusive boss. Right, I've been a faithful wife to my husband for 7 years, and I've lived with him. Although he doesn't describe my marriage as happily ever after, at least contrition and forgiveness reigned over our relationships. Twice he had infected me with different sexually transmitted infections, but my love for him dictated that I forgave him. All right, let me kind of skip ahead here. So after his death, so this is the husband that basically gave her the STIs to begin with. Whoa, what's going on there? Right. Yeah. So after his death, I was sold all out and owned. I sold all that we owned and moved to a different location where nobody knew me and started my new life. Stigma was rife in those days, and I swore I'd never disclose my HIV status to my new friends I would make. I bought myself a small apartment to settle in before I embarked on looking for some work to do, even though I had a lot of money in that bank account. And luckily, as luck would have it, I got a job in a college because I have a professional background in teaching. The director was a ruthless man who had no respect for women. I made a good vow I made my vow, so I kept my HIV status to myself. The principal of the school, who was a very kind and motherly woman, liked me a lot and cautioned me to avoid getting into trouble with the director because, quote unquote, he disregards women, and nobody knew about his family. I was also a bitter woman because of my husband's betrayal and his subsequent prideful and cowardly death. In my own small way, I hated men. Well, there we go. Anyway, what transpires is she gets into a confrontation with the director. Basically, he ends up kind of abusing her verbally, and eventually she starts to kind of play into this mantra to try and soften him up. So, I mean, obviously, so sure, here we go. When I entered the office, he sized me up before I could murmur, "I'm sorry." He slapped me hard on the face. I left the office staggering and swearing that I would submit my resignation the following morning. Though my late husband was a cheat, at least he wasn't violent, I kept saying as I drove home. Anyway, needless to say, she eventually kind of subdues the director. She walks in the next day and says, sorry about yesterday. I was irrational of me. I shouldn't have done that. The 3 short sentences rattled like raindrops in my ears. Sorry wasn't a word in this man's vocabulary. I was more shocked than relieved. I muttered something between thank you, sir, and I understand, and walked out. He then started calling me for small chats in his office, and I would even have tea there. Anyway, cutting short, she eventually ends up having a relationship with the director that had physically abused her. And eventually, they start having sex and so forth. But originally he was using a condom until one night, here we go, sexual intimacy ensued. Soon we were dating happily. For several months, we enjoyed protected sex until one night we forgot to buy condoms and we had protected sex. Anyway, cutting forward because we're running out of time here. She basically infects this guy with the HIV virus. And later on, she actually ends up marrying this guy. But she feels terribly guilty about the fact that she's infected him with HIV. And she keeps it a secret from him. And she keeps it for quite a while. She's actually feeling pretty guilty about the entire thing. But eventually she gets pregnant for the guy and she has to do a blood test to check to see the status of the kid. And for the first time, it's revealed that she is actually HIV positive to her husband. And she now has to figure out what she's going to do. And instead of confessing and coming forward with anything, this is what she says. The nightmare I had anticipated came when I got pregnant and I was inevitably have to do an HIV test carried out on me. Of course, both of us turned positive. This is the time to face the reality which would mark my destiny in marriage. I had to think fast. I didn't know I could act in Hollywood until that day. I confronted my husband with fake anger and bitterness, which looked so real. And then she says, is that why you were so much after me? Is that why you were always violent? Why didn't you let me live in peace with my son? How could you infect me with HIV? I shouted. So basically, after she's infected by her husband, works for this abusive director, seduces him, they get married, she infects him from unprotected sex, she gets pregnant, does a test, it's found out that they both have HIV, and she blames the innocent husband as if he's the one that infected her. So yeah, and she did it with tears in her eyes and stuff like that. And of course, the husband was unaware. He actually thought that maybe he was actually the one to give her the infection of HIV. So again, I mean, this is just a horrendous story at the end of the day. And I mean, I'm just going to close it out here. So I mean, she never confessed. She never told the truth. As far they both ended up on the retrovirus. The son was born, I believe, healthy and stuff like that. But to this day, she is yet to confess that she is the one who infected her husband. So last paragraph here, yet the burden in my heart is very heavy, and every time I see his mood changing or his phone go unanswered, I get into panic thinking he's probably found out the truth. The kind of panicky life I lead is worse than the punishment inflicted by the law. My advice to fellow people living with HIV is to disclose their status to their sexual partners. It is more to their benefit than to the benefit of the uninfected partner. So yeah, guys, I just wanted to share that article briefly. Of course, we'll put the description, we'll put all the links in the description and stuff. And oh wow, the sun is coming in, so I am starting to silhouette here. I just thought that was the craziest thing I'd ever seen, that this woman would go out of her way to infect this guy and then go around to blame him for the infection, which I think is, I mean, that's, I don't even know what level of insanity that is. Oh, Amos, are you back with us, man?
Yeah, I had to unplug it, my router and my I don't know what the hell's going on. I literally had to unplug everything and let it sit for like a few seconds, plug it all back in, then it all came back online. That's okay. Like 2 times I've disconnected, and I don't know what the hell's going on.
That's pretty crazy, man. Well, yeah, man, that's it for me. The sun is going to come in here pretty soon. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Man, I know what story you were just talking about. I mean, I know we talked about traps.
Yeah, it's a trap. Really does apply in this instance.
It's a real trap. That's not what. For those of you who don't know, I think what is it? Traps are like chicks with dicks.
Yeah, they're basically transvestites. They dress like women or they dress like men, but they're really straight men and straight women. So
yeah, and what's going on right now on the internet is there's a meme going around of people just acting like basically contemplating this deep question. I mean, it's on the level of SJWs and is it okay to punch a Nazi? Is they're debating is are traps gay? So if you were to get trapped into a situation where you are a man sleeping with what appears to be a woman, which is actually a person with a penis, is it gay? It has been troubling many men over the last few weeks. As
I can't imagine that situation happens so often that it's become like a thing. But okay then.
Well, I mean that's become a thing, and it probably doesn't happen that much. Just like you know, I'm seeing a lot of these racism. You know, just like I don't know. I did a post where I basically said it's interesting how today, where everyone has a phone, a camera, and social media, where they can post anything that happens fake. I'll just, for sake of argument, presume a lot of it's real. There are millions of people in this country, billions of people in the world, and we're out of the billions of interactions we have with each other every day. Does not prove that there's KKK out there.
Pretty much.
You do have racist people. You do have complete dicks out there. But what are you really trying to accomplish here when you try to throw that out there and say, you know, oh, this is the worst since of racism out there? And it's like, no, racism is at an all-time low. Humanity has just progressed along this. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying that, you know, it's exactly what you're saying, that society in general doesn't even tolerate racism, right? So even if you do have a racist out there, and we've seen like recent backlash and stuff like that from certain YouTubers and other things, even talking about issues related to race, for the most part, people won't have it, you know, which is actually a pretty good testament to people wanting to move beyond a lot of those discussions. So yeah, I think that's a positive thing. Yeah,
I mean, the concern I have is not so much racism as it is anti-racism. The paranoia and the hysteria that is surrounding the supposed racism that is so alive and well. And the fact is that racism will always be alive and well. You'll always have people tolerate difference. So what happens is you have a bunch of these people who are that are posting all these videos that are pushing this idea that racism is so strong out there that even the slightest hint of reaction, if you want to call it, to different races is perceived as white supremacy, extreme racism, you know, to the level that like you're going to lynch someone tomorrow kind of thing. And that is that mindset, that idea, that reality that people are trying to push is more dangerous than racism itself, because, you know, back in the day you had a bunch of racists. Nowadays you have a few. But of people showing, you know, a uncomfortable feeling toward, or just showing a concern, is being out of proportion, and you start beating up people that just have slight concerns around racial issues, just slight concerns, just showing a slight, hey, black people account for 13% of the population, but commit, you know, more crimes than more than 13% in crimes out there. That's not racist, that's facts. But if you say that, you're a racist and you're going to get beaten up.
Right. I mean, it's the same thing like saying, you know, the majority of the prison population is men, so I guess the prisons are sexist, right?
Yeah. But anyways, Just an ending thought there. I do apologize for the couple of the cutouts
couple
there.
Of technical glitches.
Technical glitches, yeah, I guess we could call it that. Internet providers suck. First world problems, right? But yeah, thanks for joining us today, guys. We'll be putting in all the articles in the description that we talked about. Track, and Brooks not sick next week.
What am I doing next week? No, I think I'm good next week. So, yeah, let me get over the sun here, man. So, yeah, let everybody connect with us on social media and everywhere else. And
Yep, everything will be in the description below. Thanks for joining us today on the Shitlord Preachers stream.
Thanks again, guys, for watching.
See you guys next week.